It started with a change so small, I almost missed it. A glance that lingered too long on her phone screen. A text she wouldn't open if I was in the room. The way her laughter, once unguarded, now seemed rehearsed, like she was conscious of being watched. We'd been married 9 years. We'd weathered the normal storms, bills, long work weeks, family drama. I thought we'd found a rhythm. But somewhere in the last few months, that rhythm faltered. Our conversations shrank to the bare necessities. She started spending more evenings out with friends or running errands that stretched later into the night. At first, I told myself not to be paranoid. People change, schedules shift. We'd been under stress, and maybe she just needed space. But deep down, a quieter part of me knew better. I could feel the shape of something building between us. Not an argument, but a wall. It wasn't one thing that tipped me over into suspicion. It was the accumulation. The faint scent of cologne on her scarf that wasn't mine. The late-night showers that followed her girls' nights. The new lingerie tags I found in the trash, even though she hadn't worn anything like that for me in years. These weren't dramatic signs. They were small, ordinary things. The kind of things you can explain away if you want to keep your peace of mind. And I tried. God knows I tried. But one night, lying awake in the dark while she scrolled on her phone beside me, her screen tilted just enough to keep it hidden, I realized I'd stopped believing my own excuses. Something was happening, and I needed to know what. Once I let myself accept that something was off, I started paying attention in a way I hadn't before. Not to catch her in a lie, not yet, but to see if there was a rhythm to her new life. It didn't take long. Her errands almost always fell on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Weekends that used to be for us now had a rotation. One Saturday home, one Saturday out. Even the times she left were consistent. A little after 6, back around 10, never with a solid story about what she'd been doing. I didn't confront her. I learned early that suspicion loses its edge when you show it too soon. Instead, I kept a quiet log. Dates, times, small details. I noted when she left in a different outfit than she'd worn all day. I noticed how her makeup changed. Softer at home, but with sharper lines and deeper colors when she went out. Money told its own story. Restaurant charges in neighborhoods we never visited together. Rideshare receipts at odd hours. Small purchases from boutiques I'd never heard her mention before. There were also the absences you couldn't put on paper. The way she would come home and move through the rooms like she was half somewhere else. The way her touch had changed. Less instinctive, more distracted. Like she was fulfilling an obligation she no longer felt. I began to realize that if I followed her on the right night, I wouldn't have to guess anymore. But following someone isn't a thing you do lightly. It's a step you can't undo. Once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. So for now, I stayed in the role of the quiet observer, letting the pieces fall into place. I told myself I'd act when I was certain. The truth was, I was already certain. I was just waiting for the moment I could no longer pretend otherwise. Her car finally appeared in the rearview mirror of a passing delivery van, a familiar gray sedan, gliding smoothly through the evening traffic. I let her get a full block ahead before pulling out, keeping my headlights low and my speed steady. Following someone isn't like in the movies. There's no dramatic weaving through traffic, no screeching turns. It's about patience. You watch, you anticipate, and above all, you avoid being noticed. She drove west, away from the neighborhoods we usually frequented, past the cafes we'd once loved, past the small park where we used to sit with takeout on warm evenings. It struck me that in all the years I'd known her, we'd never had reason to go this way together. The streets here were lined with older brick buildings, their windows glowing softly against the deepening dusk. Every red light felt like a test. When she stopped, I'd pause an extra car or two back, keeping a van or SUV between us when possible. The moments when her brake lights filled my windshield felt like they were staring straight into me. After 15 minutes, she turned down a narrower street, one I didn't know. I followed, slower now. The road was quieter here, the air thick with the faint smell of rain from earlier in the day. Street lamps stood farther apart, leaving patches of darkness where the shadows seemed to gather. She pulled into a small lot beside a two-story building with large windows on the ground floor. I coasted past, glancing just long enough to take in the scene. The place was a restaurant, intimate, softly lit, the kind where tables are set for two and the wine list is longer than the menu. She stepped out of the car with a casual grace, smoothing the fabric of her dress as she walked toward the entrance. Even from this distance, I could see the shift in her posture, the quiet confidence of someone arriving where they belong. I didn't park immediately. I circled the block once, twice, until I found a space across the street, tucked into the shadows between two taller buildings. From there, I could see through the restaurant's wide front windows. She was already inside, standing near the host's podium. And then I saw him. A tall man in a dark jacket, leaning forward with a smile that looked both familiar and intimate. He reached for her hand briefly before they followed the host to a corner table. I stayed in my car, the camera heavy in my lap, the lens cap off. My finger hovered over the shutter. This wasn't just a dinner. Not with that smile. Not with that dress. And I knew, with a kind of cold certainty, that whatever I captured tonight would end the marriage I thought we still had. From my spot in the shadows, the restaurant's warm interior looked almost like a stage set, every detail curated, every movement deliberate. It was the kind of place where you didn't just eat, you lingered. And they were lingering. She sat across from him at a table angled just enough that I could see both their faces in profile. The lighting was soft, golden, flattering, making it feel as though the rest of the world didn't exist beyond those walls. The first few minutes, I just watched. My hands rested on the camera, but I didn't lift it yet. I wanted to see the rhythm between them before I froze it in an image. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't formal. It was familiar. The kind of familiarity you don't build in a few casual meetings. She leaned forward slightly when he spoke, her chin resting on her hand, her eyes fixed on him with that unguarded attention I hadn't felt from her in years. When she laughed, it was low and genuine, not the polite, half-hearted sound I'd grown used to at home. When the waiter came, they didn't have the brief, polite consultation I remembered from our dinners. They barely looked at the menu before ordering, like they already knew what they wanted. That kind of ease doesn't happen with strangers. I lifted the camera for the first shot when he reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers in a slow, casual motion. She didn't flinch. She didn't glance around to see if anyone noticed. She simply turned her hand over so their palms touched. The shutter clicked softly, once, twice. Another photo as they leaned closer, the candlelight flickering between them. The scene looked almost romantic. In another life, I might have thought it was beautiful. Now, it was just confirmation. I told myself to focus on the mechanics, the angle, the lighting, the stability of the shot. It kept my mind from wandering into the territory where questions lived. How long had this been going on? How had I missed the signs this clearly? When the wine arrived, they toasted. His smile was wider now, hers softer. I took another photo. It wasn't one moment that broke me. It was the accumulation, the casual intimacy, the touches that didn't need hiding, the laughter that carried just enough to reach me through the glass. By the time they finished their meals, I had enough images to tell the story 100 different ways. And each way ended with the same truth. The woman I married was sitting in that restaurant with another man, and she looked happy to be there. I didn't move as they stood to leave. I watched them walk to the door, his hand at the small of her back, her body leaning just slightly toward him. They stepped out into the night, turning away from my side of the street, disappearing into the narrow glow of a side alley. I could have followed them further, but I didn't. I already knew enough. The drive home felt longer than it should have, though the streets were nearly empty. I kept my hand steady on the wheel, but my mind wasn't on the road. It was still at that table, in that warm golden light, watching her smile in a way I hadn't seen in years. A smile I thought was mine. The camera sat in the passenger seat, its weight oddly present, as if it knew what it held. I didn't glance at it. I didn't need to. Every frame was burned into my mind already. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same as it always had. Dark except for the porch light, the faint outline of the curtains in the living room. But stepping inside, the air felt heavier, as though the walls themselves knew what I'd just witnessed. I didn't turn on the lights right away. I stood in the dim glow from the street lamp filtering through the blinds, listening to the low hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floor under my weight. It was all familiar, yet somehow distant. Her coat was hanging by the door, the same one she'd worn earlier. She must have come home quickly after leaving the restaurant. That thought landed like a stone in my chest. She'd been with him, and then she'd come here, back into our shared life, like nothing had happened. I walked upstairs slowly, every step deliberate. The bedroom door was open, and the faint sound of her breathing told me she was already asleep, or pretending to be. I didn't check. I couldn't. Not tonight. Instead, I went to the spare room. It smelled faintly of dust and disuse. The bed still neatly made from months ago when we last had a guest. I sat on the edge for a long time, before lying down fully clothed, my eyes fixed on the ceiling in the dark. There was no rush of rage, no impulse to throw things or wake her and demand answers. Just a deep, cold understanding that whatever we'd been, we weren't anymore. That the life I thought I had ended tonight, quietly, in the flicker of candlelight on a table for two. I didn't sleep much. My mind ran in circles, but never toward hope. I didn't think about fixing it or forgiving it. I thought about what came next, the steps I'd need to take, the conversations I'd have to have, the evidence I'd have to keep safe. By the time the first pale light of morning touched the walls, I knew one thing for certain. I could live with a broken heart. I couldn't live with a lie. Morning came without the usual routine. I didn't make coffee for both of us. I didn't ask about her plans for the day. I moved through the kitchen silently, every sound amplified in the quiet. The scrape of a chair, the click of a cupboard, the hiss of the kettle. She floated through in her robe, hair pulled back, offering a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. She said something about meeting a friend later. I nodded, not committing to more than a few seconds of eye contact. If she noticed the change in me, she didn't mention it. The moment she left, I retrieved the camera from where I'd hidden it in the spare room closet. I connected it to my laptop, transferring each image into a locked folder, labeling them with the date and time. I looked at them just once, confirming they were clear enough to erase any doubt. The hand-holding, the leaning in, the way they shared space like it was theirs alone. I made backups, one on a USB drive, another uploaded to a secure cloud folder under a name that gave away nothing. I'd read enough stories to know that evidence has a way of disappearing when confrontation happens too soon. From there, I spent the next few hours looking at my options, quiet research on divorce attorneys, notes on finances, accounts we shared, assets we didn't. I wasn't moving toward an emotional showdown. I was building a foundation. The stronger the groundwork, the less she could pull the rug out from under me later. By noon, I'd booked an appointment with a lawyer for the following week. I also started a separate document, not evidence, not strategy, but a log. Dates, times, behaviors, everything I could remember from the months leading up to now. Memory fades under pressure, and I wanted my side of the story to be sharp when the time came to tell it. That evening, when she came home, I was in the living room with the TV on, pretending to be half absorbed in a game I didn't care about. She passed behind me, the faint trace of perfume following her. I didn't turn, I didn't speak. I could feel her glance linger on me, maybe curious about my mood, maybe wary. But she kept walking, the sound of her steps fading down the hallway. I stayed right where I was, my eyes on the screen, my mind on the quiet, deliberate path I'd just set in motion. The appointment with the lawyer was on a Tuesday afternoon. I took the day off work without telling her. She thought I was in the office. I let her believe that. Maintaining the appearance of normalcy had become almost second nature now, a mask I could slip on without thinking. The law office was on the fourth floor of an older building downtown, the kind with heavy wooden doors and quiet hallways that smelled faintly of paper and polished brass. My attorney, a man named Marcus, shook my hand firmly and led me into his office. I laid out the situation as plainly as I could, resisting the urge to editorize. The photographs, the suspicious patterns, the nights out that didn't add up. Marcus didn't flinch or interrupt. He just took notes in neat, methodical handwriting. When I was done, he leaned back in his chair and studied me for a moment before speaking. "You've done more than most by documenting this clearly," he said. "The pictures are strong evidence. It won't just help with divorce grounds, it puts you in a better position regarding property division and any disputes." We went over our options: filing immediately, serving her directly, or preparing everything quietly and waiting for the right moment. Marcus leaned toward the last option, not out of hesitation, but because it gave me control. "Once you tip your hand," he said, "she'll start moving pieces around. You want to be ready before that happens." I agreed. We discussed bank accounts, joint property, even the car titles. He suggested I open a separate account in my own name and begin redirecting my paycheck there. Not to hide money, but to protect access in case she decided to drain our joint funds. By the time I left, I had a folder of documents to review, a checklist of steps to take, and the quiet certainty that the marriage was no longer a question mark. It was a legal process waiting to be set in motion. At home that evening, the tension in the air felt sharper than usual. She was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, humming under her breath. I sat at the table, flipping through my phone without really seeing the screen. Every so often, I'd catch her glancing at me, quick and unreadable, before turning back to her work. Maybe she sensed something had shifted. Maybe she was just wondering why I was so quiet. When we finally sat down to eat, our conversation skimmed over safe topics: the weather, the neighbor's new fence, a TV show she'd started watching. It felt like small talk with a stranger you happened to be dining with, not the woman you'd shared nearly a decade of life with. I nodded in the right places, smiled once or twice, but my mind wasn't in the room. It was in a downtown office, hearing Marcus's calm voice telling me I was prepared, that I held the advantage now. For the first time since this started, I didn't feel powerless. After meeting with Marcus, my days took on a strange duality. On the surface, I was the same man I'd always been, going to work, paying bills, unloading the dishwasher, asking her if she needed anything from the store. But beneath that, a quieter current was pulling me forward, step by step, toward the moment everything would change. The first move was financial. I opened a new checking account in my name only, at a bank she'd never dealt with. I had my paycheck redirected there, telling HR it was for better interest rates. I left just enough in our joint account to cover the usual bills, so she wouldn't notice a sudden shift. Next, I pulled copies of every important document I could find: the mortgage papers, car titles, tax returns, insurance policies. I scanned them all and saved them to a private cloud folder, with another copy on an encrypted USB drive tucked into the lining of my work bag.
If she tried to play games later, I'd already have everything I needed.
I checked our credit reports too. It was a relief to see no new accounts or loans in my name, at least not yet. But Marcus's words echoed in my head. Once you tip your hand, she'll start moving pieces. I wanted those pieces locked down before I made my move. All the while, I kept my tone even, my face calm. If she noticed me being a little quieter, she chalked it up to work stress. When she mentioned another girls' night, I just nodded. When she came home late smelling faintly of someone else's cologne, I didn't react. Inside, though, something was shifting. The sharp ache I'd felt the night I caught her was dulling into something colder, harder. This wasn't about saving the marriage anymore. It was about leaving it on my terms, with my dignity, my security, and my future intact. I also started keeping a handwritten journal, not just dates and times anymore, but my thoughts, my feelings, the small observations that might matter later. It was partly for legal reasons, but partly for me. Each entry was a reminder that I wasn't imagining this, that I'd done the work of seeing clearly before acting. At night, I sometimes lay awake and thought about the confrontation to come. I pictured her face when she realized I knew everything, when the evidence was in front of her and there was nowhere to hide. I didn't imagine shouting or dramatic scenes. I imagined the stillness, the way a truth that big can make the air feel heavier. And I imagined walking away afterward, not looking back. By the time 2 weeks had passed since my meeting with Marcus, I had everything I needed. The photographs, the financial safeguards, the documents, copied and secured. My private accounts were funded, my personal credit clean. If she decided to retaliate, she'd find fewer openings than she imagined. What remained was the when and how. Confrontations are rarely about the words. They're about the conditions. Who has the control? Who dictates the space? Who gets to leave with the last word? I didn't want a screaming match in our kitchen or a whispered fight in bed. I wanted her to feel the weight of the evidence with nowhere to retreat. I decided it would happen on a Friday evening. That gave me the weekend to deal with the fallout without work interfering. It would also be after one of her usual girls' nights, when she'd come home relaxed, unaware. I'd be waiting. In the days leading up to it, I moved like someone placing the final pieces in a quiet game. I removed a few personal items from the house, old photographs, valuables, and the USB drive, and stored them at a friend's place without explanation. I didn't want to risk her destroying or losing anything in the heat of the moment. I also rehearsed my opening, not word for word, but the sequence. She comes home, I ask her to sit down, I slide the printed photographs across the table, I let the silence hang. No accusations, just the images, undeniable and still. Then I explain the steps already in motion, the attorney, the accounts, the fact that I know exactly what's been happening. I didn't plan to give her space to spin it, to twist the truth into something smaller. This wasn't about her version anymore. It was about me stepping out of a life built on lies. Each night that week, I watched her move through the house with the same studied detachment I'd honed for months. The phone kept close, the faint smiles at unread messages, the occasional distracted pause before answering when I asked something mundane. If she sensed that I was watching, she didn't show it. And if she suspected that I knew, she kept her mask firmly in place. The night before, I sat in the spare room with the folder of photographs in front of me. I flipped through them slowly. The hand on hers, the way they leaned toward each other, the casual comfort between them. Every image was a small hammer hitting the same nail. This is not the woman you thought she was. I slid them back into the envelope and placed them in the top drawer of the desk. Tomorrow, it would be on the table between us. Tomorrow, the pretense would end. And for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. Friday night came like any other, at least on the surface.
I kept the house dimly lit, just the warm glow of the dining room lamp spilling over the table. The envelope sat in the center, closed but unmistakably deliberate. The rest of the table was bare. No plates, no glasses, just that one object, waiting. At 6:10, my phone buzzed with a short text. Running late. Be home after 9. It was almost predictable now. I replied with a simple, okay. No punctuation, no warmth. From then on, the house felt like it was holding its breath. I didn't pace, I didn't drink. I sat in the chair across from the envelope, hands resting loosely on the table, the low hum of the refrigerator the only sound. At 9:27, her headlights swept briefly across the living room wall. A moment later, the sound of the front door opening, the click of her heels on the hardwood. She walked in wearing that same deep green dress, the one from the restaurant, and a faint trace of perfume that wasn't from me. She started with a casual hey, but froze halfway through the room when she saw me sitting there. Her eyes flicked to the envelope, then back to my face. "What's this?" she asked, trying for lightness, but her voice was already tighter than usual. "Sit down," I said, my tone flat, even. She hesitated just enough for me to notice, then pulled out the chair opposite mine. Her hands rested on her knees under the table, a small defensive posture I'd seen before when she was hiding something. I slid the envelope toward her. "Open it." She looked at it like it might burn her fingers, but eventually she pulled the flap open and slid the photographs out. The first one, her hand in his, landed face up on the table between us. I watched her eyes as they moved over it, then the next, and the next. Her breath caught on the third image, the one with the candlelight between them. She set them down slowly, not stacked, just fanned out enough for the story to be obvious. "This isn't," she started, but I cut her off.
Don't, I said quietly. Don't make up something I have to listen to. I know when they were taken. I know where. I know who he is. And I know this isn't the first time. For a moment, her expression was pure calculation. She was searching for the angle, the excuse that might still work. But then she seemed to realize I wasn't leaving her any ground to stand on. "How long have you?" she began. "Long enough," I said. "Long enough to make sure I have everything I need before I said a word to you." Silence stretched between us. She looked down at the photographs again, her fingers tracing the edge of one, not meeting my eyes. "I've spoken to an attorney," I continued. "The accounts are separated, the paperwork is ready. This conversation isn't about whether this happened, it's about the fact that I'm done living with it." Her eyes flicked up at that, a flash of something sharp, not guilt, but anger at losing control. "I'm just done," I interrupted. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You can keep talking if you want, but it won't change the fact that by this time next month, we won't be married." For the first time, she didn't have anything to say. The room was so quiet I could hear the faint tick of the wall clock in the kitchen. I stood, slid the envelope back toward me, and tucked it under my arm. "I'll be in the spare room tonight. You can have the bedroom." As I walked past her, I felt her watching me, but I didn't look back. The truth was on the table, and there was nothing left to discuss. The next morning, the house felt different. Not quieter, we'd had silent days before, but hollow, as if the confrontation had pulled something vital out of the walls. The air had that strange stillness you feel after a storm, heavy but calm. She was in the kitchen when I came downstairs, sitting at the table with her coffee. No makeup, hair tied back, eyes fixed on the mug in front of her. She didn't say good morning, and I didn't offer one. I poured myself a cup and leaned against the counter, the ceramic warm in my hands. It struck me that for years we'd done this same routine, mornings in the same space, the rhythm of shared life. But today, it wasn't shared.
It was just two people occupying the same square footage until one of them left for good. The rest of the weekend passed like that. Minimal words. No arguments, no attempts at reconciliation. If she had something to say, she kept it locked away. Maybe she was still processing. Maybe she knew it wouldn't matter. By Sunday night, I'd made up my mind. There was no reason to wait until the paperwork was finalized to start living separately. I spent the evening in the spare room packing clothes, toiletries, the few personal items I hadn't already moved. I didn't make a big production of it, just folded, zipped, and carried each bag quietly downstairs. She appeared in the hallway as I was loading the last duffel into my car. "So, that's it?" she asked. Her voice wasn't pleading. It was flat, almost cold. "That's it," I said. No fight, no dramatic scene. Just the end. I closed the trunk, got into the driver's seat, and started the engine. For a brief second, I looked at the house through the windshield. The place where we'd spent nearly a decade building a life I thought was real. Now, it was just a structure with our memories in it. Some of them good, some poisoned beyond repair. The drive away was quiet. No music, no calls. Just the steady hum of the tires on the road and the feeling of distance growing behind me. At the apartment I'd rented, small, clean, temporary, I set my bags down and stood in the middle of the living room. It didn't feel like home yet, but it felt like possibility. The walls didn't hold secrets here. The air didn't carry the weight of betrayal. I sat on the couch, exhaling for what felt like the first time in months. The pain was still there, the sharp edge of loss, the ache of trust shattered, but underneath it was something steadier, relief. I'd learned something in all this. Love doesn't end in a single moment, but respect can. Once it's gone, there's no rebuilding it, no matter how much history you share. I wasn't walking away because she cheated. I was walking away because she looked me in the eye for months and let me believe the lie. And now, for the first time in a long time, I didn't have to believe anything I didn't want to.